anhedonia has always existed. That quiet, muted type of depression has always existed. Lacking joy is an existential crisis.
Dr. Judith Joseph, welcome.
Dr. Judith.
No one thinks about the flip side of depression, which is not sad, but lacking joy.
Biologically, a woman may experience depression because of the hormones, but socially, a man may experience depression because of the pressures from society to be strong. Those of us with high-functioning depression, we think only we can do it right. We don't avoid things by hiding away. We avoid things by overworking, by busying ourselves. So it's different than burnout. You don't have to do it alone. Loneliness is the equivalent of like smoking a pack and a half of cigarettes a day. So loneliness is literally draining our life source. We need others. We need connection to thrive, to survive.
Do you think there's something that a romantic partner can do during this time?
Yes.
Hello! It's good to see you.
Yes.
Great to meet you.
I know.
I have felt like a part of your world and universe for 2 years now.
Same. I feel like I know you.
Oh my gosh, and I really feel like I know you because I got to read this book, which let me just tell you, we could talk for 2 weeks now. But I want to know what's calling you to talk about today.
Well, I think so many people lack joy in their lives, and many of us are in relationships that literally are draining us of joy.
Let me just sit down for that one. Not for you, Jared, just for other people.
And I want people to feel empowered to reclaim their joy because joy is our birthright as human beings. We just don't know how to access it anymore.
And you know it's not lovers if we don't get all up in your business, which thankfully these are things you already shared in the book, so I know you're comfortable talking about, but I would love to hear about your journey with Anhidonia.
Oh, let me tell you, how much time do you have?
All right, let's set our watch to about an hour, but if you got more, I'll take it.
Okay, let's
go.
do this.
What a joy to have you here. Author, of course, doctor, and instructor on Masterclass. Tell us about your Masterclass.
My masterclass is The Magic of Menopause, and it's myself, other experts, and Halle Berry.
Hey.
And we talk about, well, my portion is really the mind-body connection and how hormones don't just impact down there, they can impact up here, and useful skills that you can use throughout perimenopause and menopause to reclaim your joy.
I love that. We're talking about today joy. So that is the perfect lead in to talk about this beautiful word that you've brought into my life, which is, let's say it together,
Anhedonia.
We didn't even rehearse that.
I always felt like Anhidonia sounded like this exotic land, you know,
Yes.
like in Disney. But it's an old word, and it's been in the research for like over 100 years, but no one knows about it. And I found that like in my lab work, there are all these terms that we talk about among scientists, and we just don't share it. Mm-hmm. But it's such a common experience. An means lack of, hid is pleasure, and the nia is like the symptom. So anhedonia is when you just don't find pleasure and joy in things that once lit you up. So if you eat your food, and like me, if your favorite food is sushi or lasagna, I can't pick between the two, and you're eating it, but you don't even remember tasting it, you just kind of like ate it to feed yourself calories, anhedonia. If you are being intimate with your loved one and you just can't wait for it to be over, anhedonia. If you're talking to your friend and you just can't wait to get home because you're not enjoying the interactions, anhedonia. So it's like a lack of interest, pleasure in things that used to light us up. And we have to remember that as humans, we are built with the DNA for joy. So if we can't access joy, that's a problem.
That's so interesting because I often hear people in the science field say the opposite, that we're not built for joy, we're built for survival. So that even to explain why we stay in negative relationships is because your body prioritizes the pair bond over joy. And so it's like, well, the devil you know is better than one that you don't, so let's stick this one out. But I've actually never heard before that we're built for joy.
Well, think about it. We have dopamine in our brains, and joy is for survival. So I don't think it's necessarily the opposite. I think you do need joy to survive. I've been to so many countries around the world where people have nothing, like literally not even running water. But you still see children playing, you still see elderly people on porches laughing, and joy has, in history been used as a form of resistance. Look at what's happened with the African diaspora. We have been put under so much pressure and oppression, but we still access joy to survive. Like we still have music, even though we have terrible times. Some of the best music comes out of survival, right?
Yes.
But that was also a joyful experience. So I think that joy is necessary for survival. So if you're lacking joy, then you're not just not thriving, you're not able to survive.
Is anhedonia then the lack of ability to access that life-saving joy? Is that neurochemical?
Yeah, so there's a lot of research looking at anhedonia in different conditions. You see anhedonia really prominent in depression, and I talk about that a lot, but you also see it in conditions like dementia. Think about really elderly people. When they're eating and doing things, they're just literally hanging on by a thread. They're not lighting up. You see anhedonia in things like substance dependence. So think about someone who's dependent on like a substance or a drug. They're no longer getting real pleasure out of the experience. They're just getting high to not have the pain of the physiological withdrawal. You also see it in conditions like schizophrenia. So anhedonia is something that is really in a lot of mental health conditions, but no one knows about it. But the prominent ones are depression and substance dependence.
In essence, depression was co-opted by the general population as a term that they used and self-diagnosed, and in many ways diluted the severity of it for people who genuinely experience it. With anhedonia, is it something that is just accessible for you and me to say, I'm just experiencing anhedonia this week, or is it something that is, designed for people who are really, really struggling?
Well, it's not a condition. Anhedonia is a symptom. So think of, you have a cold and you cough. The coughing is a symptom of the cold. That's why anhedonia can be experienced across different conditions, right? But what I think you're right. People think of depression as you're in bed, you're crying, you're not functioning. So we have this bias towards thinking that depression means you're broken down, you're not doing things. I want people to know that depression can be hidden. It has different faces. So the depression of your grandma, let's say 40, 50 years ago, is not the same depression as today. There are so many things that have changed in our world, like the things that we eat, the way that we interact with each other. We're constantly on our phones. We're not looking at each other. Even things like rest, like getting good sleep, is more challenging because we have our devices, the light from devices, but also there's just so much in the world that we just can't escape because we're constantly inundated with bad news. So our brains don't even get that quiet that it used to get. So there are many reasons why depression looks different today. But anhedonia has always existed. That quiet, muted type of depression has always existed, but people don't know that it exists. So when you think of classic depression, you think of crying, right? I think about it as two sisters. One sister is crying, not getting out of bed. The other sister doesn't get attention because she just doesn't feel. She's not feeling, but she's still showing up. She's still taking her kids to school. She's still showing up at work and doing for others, still being the entrepreneur, but she's lacking joy. And because she's not in crisis, like the sister who's depressed and not getting out of bed, she's not getting the help she needs or the support. But it is a crisis. Lacking joy is an existential crisis. We all have the birthright of joy as human beings, but we don't know how to access joy. And I'm trying to change that.
Can you walk us through, because you experienced this?
Yes.
Can you share your story?
Well, on the outside, I looked perfect. The perfect family.
What was the
job.
year? The year was...
The year was 2020. And
ooh, what a year.
Yes.
I already am like, ooh, you got any pills for that?
Many people can identify with that shift in joy after 2020. Why? Because 2020 was a collective trauma. And in 2020, I was sitting at my desk in my lab in Midtown Manhattan, and I was giving this talk to this group of healthcare professionals, major hospital system. But halfway through that talk, I felt numb. I felt anhedonia. I felt depressed. And I was like, how did this happen to me? Right? Like, I study depression. I research it. I treat it. But it snuck up on me because it wasn't that type of depression that doesn't get out of bed. It was that type of depression that is the rock, that shows up for her team, that takes care of this little child at home whose partner is a frontline worker going through an enormous amount of stress. That's what that depression looked like. And I just thought, if this could happen to me, an expert, a healer, this must be happening to other people. And so I wanted to really research this hidden depression that many of us struggle with, but we just don't have a name for it. And that's why I set out to do the first peer-reviewed clinical study in high-functioning depression, to figure out what it was that causes us to be like this. What causes anhedonia in high-functioning folks? Those of us who wear a mask of pathological productivity.
You were partnered at the time.
Yes.
Yes. And how did that shape or shift the dynamic between the two of you?
So, many people like myself don't share what's happening. And I think at that time, I didn't really talk about my struggles because there was a lot of shame involved. So I felt like I should have known better. And I think a lot of people feel this way, like they internalize the shame and blame. Like, how did I end up being depressed when I'm a healer of depression, right? So I really didn't talk about it. And in my book, I even talk about how I didn't tell my therapist. Like, I've been in therapy for over 10 years. I didn't even want to tell my therapist that I was depressed. That's how much of a people pleaser I was. And in my research, what I found is that a lot of times this hidden depression is tied to unresolved trauma. So when you think of trauma, you think of people having a trauma response of avoiding triggers, right? You don't want to go to the place that triggered you. You don't want to see the people that trigger you. You hide away from it. You avoid it. But those of us with high-functioning depression, we don't avoid things by hiding away. We avoid things by overworking, by busying ourselves. So it's different than burnout. It's coming from within. So even though you're in the workplace and you're feeling this way, when you leave work, you cannot relax. You're taking on a side hustle. You're taking on a project. You're busying yourself with your family's issues. You cannot sit still. And like me, there are many people out there who, when they sit still, they feel empty. When they're not busy, they feel restless. So they continue doing things to avoid. So no one knew. My partner didn't know. My therapist didn't know. My team didn't know. No one knew because I wore that mask of pathological productivity so well. And I was showing up and I was over functioning.
Do you think that there's something that a romantic partner can do during this time? I think a lot of people could hear this and wonder if their partner is experiencing it because there feels like sort of a glass between them. And they can't feel it, but they can sense that they're just not connecting the way that they used to.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people listening to this will think that this is just motherhood. Oh, that's just being a mom.
Yeah.
No, like you're supposed to be able to access joy. And it happens.
Which actually, that's kind of a twist too, because some people think that you're experiencing the most joy in motherhood. It's all joy. What? Like you have this baby. It's so joyful. So I think it's actually pretty cool now that we're at a place where we're like, no, we understand that moms can experience and go through this time of extreme lackluster.
In fact, most moms do. 80% of mothers go through the postpartum blues. 80%. It's so important to think about what's happening biologically with women. Our hormones are going really, really up during pregnancy and then they drop really low. So that third trimester to after giving birth and that drop in that progesterone, and the changes that happen in our brain, it's literally chemical. So we're not supposed to be happy. Mm-hmm. We literally are supposed to feel sad, but we're told the opposite and we're guilted. We're made to feel shameful if we say that we're not happy, even though biologically and biochemistry-wise, we should be very unhappy. So that's just one of the things. But men can experience high-functioning depression too. Many men are brought up in cultures where they're told to not express how they're feeling, to be the provider. So many times we see these men with anger issues, but they're really depressed, right? They come home and they knock back a couple of bears. Yes. They're self-soothing that way. So it's something that I think it's important to understand from like a biopsychosocial model. A biopsychosocial is something we all have. Biologically, a woman may experience depression because of the hormones, but socially, a man may experience depression because of the pressures from society to be strong.
Biopsychosocial. What's the psychological component? This episode is sponsored by me because why not? Did you know that Lovers is more than a podcast? It's an entire suite of tools designed to help you reach your intimate potential. Like there's Shay. You can ask my AI anything, or as I call her, Shay. Sign up for my weekly newsletter or check out my free resource library of quizzes and worksheets at loversbyshan.com. Want more? Join the Lovers community for $20 a month. This is a space to connect with others who share our passion. Book one-on-one time with me, join weekly classes, and even be a part of the podcast. Okay, that's a whole lot of information, but here's the bottom line. If you are ready to enjoy the journey of creating a euphoric, intimate life as much as you're going to enjoy the destination, then head over to loversbyshan.com, and I'll see you there. Biopsychosocial. What's the psychological component?
The psychological is our past trauma, and each of us has different trauma. You know, you may not have like the big T trauma, like an assault or a combat or near-death experience, but we all have these emotionally painful experiences in our past that have shaped us significantly and shaped the way that we see ourselves in the world and the way we interact with others. So a trauma could be an attachment trauma. You know, maybe you were raised in a family where you didn't have the most supportive attachment figures. Maybe you were neglected a bit. Or you may have had a personal trauma. Like for myself, coming from Trinidad at a small age to the US and having very little, I've done the work and I've really been unpacking this in my own therapy about how that scarcity trauma impacted me. But it doesn't have to be a personal, individual trauma that you've experienced. It could be generational. If your parents or their parents came from little and they passed on those behaviors and it's not processed, you can have that fear of running out too, just from what your ancestors have been through. So all of these things are so important. That's why I say that we have our own biopsychosocial. We all have our own unique fingerprint. But if we don't understand the unique science of our own happiness, if we don't understand the areas we're losing joy, how can we ever hope to achieve happiness? We don't even understand what's making us unhappy.
I love the biopsychosocial model because then it does give you that moment to reflect, because sometimes you just have that like unrest and you don't really specifically know why. And then if you just focus on, okay, is there social elements? Is there something biologically happening? Did I just go through a life-changing medical event like giving birth, or maybe menopause, whatever that is, which shout out to your masterclass. And or is it something that is, you know, psychological? Is there something from my past? Is there a work event that I haven't addressed? Is there something from my family that I haven't uncovered? So I love that framework as a way to check in. Interestingly, when you were talking about, you know, in the book, I think people will all get a picture in their mind of somebody. Maybe it's themselves, maybe it's a mom. For me, it was, did you watch White Lotus?
Yes.
It was the dad.
Oh, yeah.
Because that level of high functioning depression, which I'm sure, I mean, so we can't say, okay, just to help me out, would we say he would be a high functioning depressed individual or a high functioning anhedonic individual?
Well, anhedonia, and this is really great because in the diagnostic manual for psychiatry, you don't have to be sad to be depressed. For clinical depression, you don't have to endure sadness. And I don't think many people know that. But again, in the science world, we all know that. And that's why depression can be so sneaky, because you don't have to be endorsing sadness. You can say, actually, I feel nothing. So either you are depressed or sad, or you have anhedonia, which is a lack of feeling, like that numbness, that lack of pleasure. And so when people know that, wait, I don't have to be sad to meet criteria for even clinical depression, let alone high functioning depression, then it opens up so many doors for them. Like, then I can get help. Because I think people have this notion that, well, I have to be sad and crying and then I get help. No, this lack of joy is a problem. So if you say that you have anhedonia, you should be getting the help that you need to correct that. Because we all have the DNA for joy. And if you're not accessing joy, that's a problem.
Was there somebody in particular for you when you were going through this that you're like, this person did it right, and this would be the example of the person I would say don't do it like that?
Well, for me, I always look to my mom. You know, my mom does not have a formal education, but she is wise. You know, this woman has managed to have 4 children, bring them to this country, raise her kids to the point where one is a doctor, one is a lawyer, one's an engineer, and one is an accountant with nothing, right? So I look to my mom often during these times. So one of the things I told my mother was, she had no idea I was struggling. She had no idea I was going through a divorce. She had no idea any of this was happening. You know what she said? She said, Judith, you don't ever have to do anything alone, you know? Loneliness is a choice. And that just like hit me here. It's like, wow, why was I doing this all alone? Again, those of us with high functioning depression, we think only we can do it right. We are doers. We derive our self-worth from what we do for others. But here are my mother, who had 4 kids, and watching her as I was growing up, she was always chatting with the neighbors. She was always active in the church. She took the help. She would always get hand-me-downs from other people. She never rejected the help, right? You don't have to do it alone. And I think people just need to be reminded that you don't have to be alone. Loneliness is a choice. And the Surgeon General just said, he just came out with that report that said loneliness is the equivalent of like smoking a pack and a half of cigarettes a day. So loneliness is literally draining our life source. We need others. We need connection to thrive, to survive. And it's a point of joy that many of us leave on the table every day.
We both have a class on Masterclass.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to ask you a question. It's kind of my pet peeve question to close things out, because my class on Masterclass is called The Art of Sex Appeal. And it's 2 hours of how to invite more pleasure, specifically romantic and sexual pleasure, into your life, how to invite more seductiveness, more eroticism, more pleasure during sex and specificity. And the number one question I get asked is about the sexy eye triangle, which is a technique that you use for flirting. That's like a fast technique. So people are like, tell me about the sexy eye triangle. I was like, there's so much more rich, in-depth things, but those things I talk about in the class may take more time to understand or to figure out how you connect with them, where a sexy eye triangle is a formula. So for anybody who's listening to this and feels like the light was turned on when you said that word in the beginning, and is there a sexy eye triangle tip you can offer them to start to turn this around?
It's really tempting to only stick to the things that currently give you pleasure. But I want to challenge you. And when you take my Anhidonia quiz and you look at the areas where you're lacking joy, I want to challenge you to actually dive into those areas again, right? And it's important to do that because as humans, we want to do what's easy, right? If we're good at things, we're like, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm good at. But when you think of all the areas that you're losing joy, there are different avenues that you can get pleasure in your brain. If you just stick to the 1 or 2 or 3, you're missing out on all those other avenues where you can be getting those points of joy. You may have to be an archaeologist in your own timeline. You may have to go back to old pictures from childhood and then look at where you maybe looked like you were lit up, where you felt spiritually full and fed, and you're like, oh, what was happening when I was 8 years old there, So you may have to do some digging and journaling and being like, oh, well, that was around the time that my parents got divorced. What did we used to do together as a family then? Maybe I need to start doing those things again. Maybe we used to go to the beach all the time. Maybe I have to start being back in nature and see if I can access joy, because now I live in a city and I don't really do those things. And it could be that I was pushing down that part of my life because it was so painful. So you may have to do some digging, but I would challenge you to try and engage in the things that you don't enjoy anymore to see if you can squeeze some joy points out of there.
I think that is phenomenal advice. I think it's very illuminating because yes, when we are experiencing low points, we're like, well, what's giving me the high? Let me do more of those things. But you've been living life that way, pressing the gas on those areas already, and you feel how you feel. So it's about reflecting on, well, what if I did it a different way? That area that I have been neglecting, that I didn't think that was that important, maybe it actually is. And I also love the fact that you're not telling people to discover something that's outside of their realm, like maybe you have to go to Buenos Aires and start a new life there. It's going back to the life that you've already had and lived, and knowing that, again, because you do have it within you to experience joy, you were born with that drive and that right, you already have the tools. You just maybe have to go back into your past to find where you left it. And for people who are like, what are they talking about right now? Because they don't follow, where are all the places that they can find your light?
Well, you can find me on Dr. Judith Joseph on all the socials, and you can buy my book at my website, drjudithjoseph.com. And it is a great note to end on, because you know how the lack of joy is contagious? Like if you ever worked for someone who was so irritable, joyless, it spreads. Everyone in the organization is that way. Joy is contagious. So in the way that I found joy again by performing, it spread. It spread to my community. So it's important to invest in joy not just for yourself, but for your family and for your community.
So long story short, if you want to be happy, follow Dr. Judith. That's your sexy eye triangle fix, right? We did it. Yes. We fixed it.
You got to teach me that, though.
Thank you so much to Dr. Judith. Please go and check out her book, High Functioning, as well as her class on Masterclass. And also, when you get a subscription to Masterclass, you can also check out my class on Masterclass, The Art of Sex Appeal, supporting 2 of your faves in one. And I am taking the doctor's orders this week and taking it easy because it's a holiday week here in America. And I want to spend time connecting with the people who bring me joy and pouring into them. And that's why this episode is a little shorter than usual. But we'll be back next week with our same usual time. Until then, enjoy, rest, relax. And I also want to remind all of you, if you want to hear from me weekly and get a love letter, you can do so by signing up for my free newsletter at loversbyshan.com/newsletter.